about the National Security Agency, which has the technical... You there, John? Jack?
I'm here.
I can't see you nor hear you.
Well,
okay.
I'm here.
Okay, thanks very much. Not you, it's our inability to see you. The National Security Administration, the National Security Agency, rather, which tapes so much stuff. Just tell us what basically they do that's fairly common knowledge, and what will they be doing tonight?
They have the ability to sweep up. Imagine a huge vacuum cleaner. All of the communications that are going around the world, they sweep them up in a very sort of broad way, and then they look for certain phone numbers and certain things that are of interest to investigators and try and single out some of those conversations. So what they are doing is they have millions and millions of phone calls that they have sucked up into this vacuum cleaner. They have to be very careful because if it is an American citizen, there are very strict rules of the road for how you go about dealing with those kinds of communications. But they will be sorting through all of the communications that have been going from phone numbers that they have a very specific interest in, looking for clues.
Okay, thanks very much, Jack. Thank you very much. Let's turn around now because Governor Pataki is here. Hi, Governor. How are you? Thank you for coming. Have you got a microphone on? And if you couldn't, would you mind going and sitting down and take George Stephanopoulos' microphone? Governor Pataki, the governor of New York, we've seen him a couple of times today, briefing in the first instance by himself and then with the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani. And I am grateful, sir, as I'm sure the audience is, that you take time from pressing events at the least to come in and tell us what's going on.
Well, Peter, we're doing everything we can.
You know John Miller, by the way.
Yes, of course I know John. We're doing everything we can to try to make sure that we rescue as many people as possible, provide the services to those who have been injured, make sure we have the medical support staff and the emergency teams in place, and I
apologize, I'm going to interrupt you several times.
Sure.
Are you rescuing people at the moment? Because we're not certain.
We have the equipment down in Lower Manhattan right now. The city has its police and fire emergency services down there, and we've augmented it with our National Guard heavy equipment that is down there right now. I cannot say that anybody has been rescued, that anybody has been uncovered, but because the first step is to put out the fires and to make sure that the rescue workers are safe, but that's the goal.
There's some reports of people using their cell phones. In fact, John remarked on this earlier, people using their cell phones from under the rubble to communicate their location. Have you been able to get to people in those situations?
I can't say that anybody's been able we've been able to get to anybody, but I do know that every step that can be taken is being taken.
Okay, so go on with what have you been doing this afternoon and this evening?
Well, I wanted to make sure that we had the support team, and we've been working with Mayor Giuliani to augment the city's services. I also spoke with the president and the vice president, and we were getting security briefings on a regular basis. And Peter, I got to tell you that the outpouring of support from around the surrounding area, from around the country and around the world has been enormous. You know, this is a very dark day in American history, but we're going to get through it. The people's resolve is strong, the spirit is strong, and we will not allow our freedom to be taken from us.
I know you said yourself you've talked to President Bush and to Vice President Cheney. We had the impression that for a while there today, Mr. Cheney was the only person left in the White House.
No, I spoke with the president early, probably 9:20, 9:30 this morning, and he's been extremely responsive. All the help we've needed from the federal government we've gotten.
Do you need anything more? The Attorney General said that they were sending in some different kinds of emergency teams to New York. Does that mean you are in real need at the moment?
Right now, all the needs that we've been told about have been met. But as we go forward, this is not going to be a one-night or a one-day effort. This is going to go on for days and weeks. And the emergency forces that are there are going to need relief. We're going to have to rotate teams in and out. We're going to need specialized teams. And that's why we're very grateful that we have had this support from the federal government, from the surrounding governors, and from everybody pulling together.
John?
We're hearing the first reports of people being rescued at the scene, but, you know, there's a couple of ironies here. Your office, the governor's office, used to be in the World Trade Center.
That's right.
At another time not long ago, you would have been there today.
That's right. And we still have a lot of state offices there, and I have a number of friends who were there this morning.
A number of friends who are unaccounted for even now?
Unaccounted for right now.
Which means that, in all likelihood, you probably know people who were killed in this.
We don't want to give up hope at this point. As I said, we're continuing to do everything we can to try to continue the search and rescue operations, and until everything's been done, hope is something you have to have.
Governor, how close have you come to seeing for yourself what it's like?
I've been to the hospitals. I was with, and the spirit is incredible. I was at St. Vincent's with some injured police and firefighters who were in the hospital injured, and they wanted to go back. They wanted to go back down to help their colleagues. And I was at Cabrini when we had lines of people blocks long on the street looking to donate blood. So the spirit of the people, the response has been not one of allowing the terrorists to frighten New Yorkers off the streets. It's been one of pulling together, showing that spirit, showing that hope. And, you know, we've seen death and we've seen destruction, but we've also seen hope. And we will get through this.
You travel through the city in pretty organized fashion at the moment. Are a lot of people out in the city tonight?
No, and they shouldn't be. The vast majority of the people are home, and that's where we want them. But we need to have the highways and the streets clear for the emergency services and the emergency vehicles, and they are right now.
Are all of the hospitals in the city able to cope with what's been presented to them? I recall that earlier today you were calling for doctors to volunteer, and you were calling for nurses to volunteer.
We have seen an outpouring of volunteers in the hospitals, and we've seen an outpouring of donations of blood, so that at this point, the hospitals have the supplies, have the staff, have the support to be able to deal with the crisis as it moves forward. But what's going to happen, Peter, is those doctors, those nurses are going to get tired, and we're going to need the relief teams. And we've set up a statewide system to make sure that people don't just come here, but they register, so that as we need them, we can call on them and bring them in waves to help with that process.
You and Mayor Giuliani have both gone out of your way today to say to people that they must be patient, that in time the United States will retaliate, and that's a matter for the federal government. You want to just give us your thoughts on that?
Peter, that's right. This is something where I'm confident that the President and his team and our military have the ability to retaliate and take the appropriate action, and I'm confident they will. You know, we've seen anger on the streets, and there are moments when I feel it myself, but I've also seen hope, and we have to let that anger not overcome our desire to make sure we are still a nation of laws and a nation of justice. So let the federal government deal with the terrorists, let them make the appropriate response, and let's turn our anger to constructive efforts to rebuild and to pull us together.
It's interesting, Governor. I'm not even sure you know this, but we just heard a short while ago that Kmart, its 2,100 stores in the country, are not going to sell guns and ammunition at the moment. They've taken all their guns and their ammunition off the shelves, which suggests that someone else besides yourself understands there's real anger in the community, and these are those unfortunate times when prejudice sometimes tends to boil over.
There is anger, there is prejudice, but we have to put that aside and understand that the terrorist acts that have devastated the city and frightened the country are aimed at taking away our freedom, and we cannot take away other people's freedom in retaliation. We have to be a nation of laws. Let the President, let the administration make the appropriate response, and let's turn that anger to hope, turn it to action, turn it to working to make sure that we come back as a city and as a country as strongly as possible.
You have no doubt about it, I gather.
I have no doubt about it. This city has been through an enormous tragedy today. This is one of the darkest days in American history, and it's an ongoing nightmare, but we will get through this. Our freedoms will be intact, and this city and this country will be stronger than ever.
Governor Pataki, Governor George Pataki, Governor of New York, thank you very much for coming in. Opportunity to talk to you in person. We've seen you several times today on the television. I know exactly how busy you are. Thank you, sir. Let's go back to the streets of New York and ABC's Bill Blakemore, who is downtown. All of this, of course, is at the lower part of Manhattan on the western side of the city on the Hudson River, and ABC's Bill Blakemore is there. And John, you've heard the governor say that things are pretty quiet on the street. Is that the way you find it down there? Hang on, Bill. Hang on. Can't hear you just yet. Hang on. My apologies. Give us one of those 1, 2, 3s, if you wouldn't mind.
1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much. Now I hear you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me, Peter, now?
I can, Bill. Go ahead.
It's very eerie down here in the financial district, Peter. We're just slightly north of the wreckage. The electricity is out everywhere, so we're only able to see things by the very harsh floodlights that have been brought in a few places. There's still smoke billowing out of the wreckage and out of 1 or 2 buildings right next to it. We understand the Marriott Hotel is still on fire. They're pouring water on where they can. But within the past hour, firefighters have told members of our ABC News team that it's clearly going to be morning before they can begin to move any of these hundreds of volunteers, firemen, other rescue workers in to begin to try to make something of it. People who have been right down next to the base of what was the trade towers say there's virtually nothing left, maybe a few flights of stairs, a few stories of one of the buildings, but that when they came down, there was so much melting and so much demolishing of any kind of structure that they cannot imagine much being left or much hope of finding anybody alive, though search and rescue is being mounted. We've seen dog teams being brought into position. There are hundreds of firemen just to the west of me here over on the West Side Highway, and dozens of fire trucks and police cars ready to move in. But for the moment, mostly it's just trying to get the temperature down at the base of where the trade towers were and to get the rest of the fire stopped.
And Bill, one knows from past experience that a huge amount of heavy equipment is needed in the area in order to continue the searching operation. Do you see it showing up?
Indeed, we've seen every now and then fleets of bulldozers and other heavy equipment moving through the back streets here. In the dark as it is just now, every now and then a fleet of flashing lights and sirens will go by as the people working on the strategy here are trying to figure out how to get these pieces of equipment into position for what they're going to have to do in the morning. But we can see that it's clearly going to be many days of a great deal of grim work to try to take it apart and to do what they can for anybody that they can find alive. But it's going to be morning before we can really see it.
Thanks very much, Bill Blakemore. One of the things that people who aren't familiar with this part of New York may not fully appreciate is that the trade towers stood, emphasis on stood, very close to the Hudson River. And the West Side Highway, which comes down the west side of New York, past the World Trade Center, and then tucks around and goes up towards, that's Brooklyn, in the map over to the right and across the Brooklyn Bridge and towards the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. The World Trade Center are very close to the edge of the river, and all that stuff right underneath the World Trade Center at the moment is basically landfill. And so there is a very narrow physical window through which the relief operators can work. Here's the mayor.
Than we need at this point. We're very grateful for it, and it'll be stored in areas, and probably over the next 2 or 3 days we will need it. And we'll do everything we can to support the efforts of the people who are trying to recover people from the debris and the horror that's taken place down there. The number to call if you have questions. I'm not sure we can answer all of your questions, but at least we can try to answer it, is 1-212-560-2730. That's 1-212-560-2730. If you have questions throughout the night and tomorrow, that's the number to call rather than 911, which you should just call if there is an emergency. We had over 1,100 emergency room visits today that we know of. So far, we have 6 fatalities that we know of, 5 at St. Vincent's. Obviously and tragically, there are going to be a lot more than that, but that's what we know of at this point. We had over 300 patients that were treated at St. Vincent's, over 160 at Bellevue, 250 at Beekman Downtown Hospital. And the hospital, these hospitals were probably the ones under the most stress, but they were able to get through. I want to thank all the people that helped St. Vincent's getting the water that they needed and the support that they needed. Also, I'd like to say to people that might consider doing this that services should be made available in New York City tomorrow on a fair and equitable basis. Anybody that thinks that they're going to gouge consumers or ask for extra amounts of money for food or anything else, we're going to have the police and the Consumer Affairs Department out there. So just be careful. This is a time in which we all have to cooperate and help each other. Alternate side street parking is suspended. Sanitation services will take place in most of the city, except obviously in the lower part of Manhattan, where the sanitation department will be working to remove debris, which has already started. And the schools, again, will be closed tomorrow. And hopefully we'll get them open as soon as possible. Tomorrow the effort will be at trying to recover as many people as possible and trying to clean up the horrible mess that was created by all of this. And I would ask people to cooperate as much as possible in that effort. If you have to come into Manhattan because your business is essential, then obviously do it. The upper part of Manhattan will be open. But if tomorrow is a day in which you want to stay home and stay with your family and give comfort and support maybe to other people that have been affected by this, it would be a good day to do that. Yeah, the point that Richie Shearer makes is people are wonderful, and I mean this in the best sense of the word. We've had thousands and thousands of people that have come to help us. When I was down at the site near the World Trade Center, I met a lot of the National Guard's people that the governor has sent, really wonderful young men and women. We have enough volunteers now. I mean, we have more volunteers, frankly, than we need at this point. And what we need to do is to focus the efforts of the professionals that are there in being able to do the recovery and try to save as many lives as we can and restore services as quickly as possible. We may be asking for more volunteers tomorrow and the next day and the day after, but right now we don't need any more volunteers.
Mr. Mayor, is there still hope that there are people who are still alive and well?
Yes, there's hope. There's hope that there are people that are still still alive.
How is the rescue effort hampered by the darkness? What do you do?
We moved a lot of lights in so that the area is being lit now, so that I don't think the rescue effort is going to be hampered by the darkness. The rescue effort is hampered by the fact that there's still fire there. There are still unsound structures, and it's still dangerous, although the rescue effort is now taking place. But if you're asking me, is it hampered? It's hampered because of the conditions, not because of the nighttime.
Is there a long procession of heavy bulldozers and other heavy construction equipment making its way down to lower Manhattan? What is that going to be used for?
That's going to be used to move debris out of the way so that the emergency vehicles can get in and out quickly, so that we can get the ambulances in a more expeditious fashion than we've been able to do. And I want to thank the Deputy Mayor Rudy Washington, who has spent most of the day coordinating, getting all of that emergency equipment in the right place, ready to move. If you go along Houston Street, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of pieces of equipment that are lined up to move in and to take debris out. And now they've started doing that. And I think that's probably what you observed.
From ABC 7 News, this is a special report. Continuing coverage, America Under Attack.
Good evening. I'm Maureen Bunyan with Kathleen Matthews at ABC 7, bringing you up to date on the impact of these terrible attacks today at the Pentagon and at the World Trade Center on life in the Washington area.
That's right. As you've heard up in New York, here in Washington as well, there's been a real attempt tonight on the part of public officials to assure Americans that even on this darkest of days that Americans' freedoms will remain intact. Ground zero, of course, in Washington is the Pentagon, and that's where ABC 7 News reporter Kevin Schultz is now tonight. Kevin, bring us up to date on the situation there.
Well, Kathleen, we are outside of the Pentagon. All the rescue crews, of course, are still on the scene. We were one of the only TV crews allowed on the grounds of the Pentagon this evening. In fact, our tapes had to be reviewed by the FBI before we could show them to you this evening. We joined the Montgomery County Urban Search and Rescue Team from Rockville. That's the same team that went to the Oklahoma City bombing and rescued people in that disaster. We rode from their headquarters in Rockville in a bus and set up fort about 75 yards from the hole in the Pentagon that we have been looking at all day. There are about 30 to 40 members in this team with 3 search dogs. They go into the Pentagon for 3 hours at a time. When they come out, they tell us that they see concrete upon concrete, electrical wires everywhere, desks teetering on the edge of floors that have been blown away, and of course bodies of people who did not survive the tragedy. We did see the FBI agents bringing out bags upon bags of evidence. We saw a designated area for plane parts. There was not a piece larger than 2 feet. The Montgomery County Rescue Team has set up a fort in what has become a tent city on the grounds of the Pentagon. They plan to be here 10 days straight. They are joined by rescue teams from Fairfax County, Nashville, Tennessee, and Virginia Beach. We will have a close-up look for you of this rescue team and their efforts from today when we join you again tonight on ABC 7 News at 11. Reporting live from the Pentagon, I'm Kevin Schultz, ABC 7 News. Back to you.
Kevin, we look forward to your report.
Also, of course, these incidents have affected traffic all over the Washington area, and we want to bring you up to date on that. We should tell you that Park Police have reopened the remaining streets around the mall. Also open are the bridges between the District and Virginia, and Interstate 395 in both directions are open, but there are some closures around the Pentagon, including Washington Boulevard. In the District, some streets are still closed around the White House. The monuments and the memorials are all still closed. Kathleen?
Well, as of this evening, there are some additional schools that have decided to close for tomorrow. We want to bring you the very latest there. First of all, D.C. public and all charter schools are going to be closed. In Maryland, Anne Arundel County, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County schools will close. Here's some of the new ones. Alexandria City schools will be closed tomorrow, as well as Arlington County schools. Fairfax County schools will be closed, as well as Falls Church schools.
Many offices will be open. We are told the Pentagon expects all of its personnel to be at work tomorrow. Also, all federal offices and all district offices will be open, and personnel is expected to show up to work at the Pentagon, federal offices, and at all D.C. government offices.
We leaped ahead a little bit there, and you saw some additional schools in Virginia. I hope you had a chance to check those out. We'll be back in just a half hour with the very latest on all of this. Meanwhile, we rejoin ABC News in progress.
Her brother was still trapped under 40 feet of rubble near the Forward Hotel in Manhattan. John, help me. The Forward Hotel is the Marriott Hotel, which used to be the Vista Hotel. It's all the same hotel, right?
It's now the Millennium Hotel,
okay.
But it's the hotel that stands directly in front of the World Trade Center on West Street.
All right. And she called to say that he gave specific directions to her where he was located, and said he was there with 2 New York City policemen, because policemen and firemen are under this rubble as well, because they were going one way when everybody else was fleeing in the other way. We don't know who her name is and his name is, and it doesn't matter. But it is why, on an occasion like this, there's always hope. And if you think about a building collapsing on itself, we've seen this before in earthquakes, and we are always astounded, no matter where it is in the world, now how primitive the conditions, that people survive for days and days and days on end. So the imperativeness of getting, this place quiet, which would be very hard in the next few hours, so that people can work in there with some measure of efficiency. The importance of getting in the dogs. They're sometimes called mortuary teams, which is grisly, but they're called that anyway. The federal government has sent 3 of them to New York and a couple to the Pentagon as well. But the value of dogs and the value of searching as quickly as you can through the rubble almost invariably turns up success stories, no matter where incidents like these occur. We've been joined by Barbara Walters, who I think is as appalled as all of us by this. What have you been doing? And what do you bring us?
Of course we are all appalled. There aren't adjectives enough to describe how we feel.
Sure.
I just talked a few moments ago to Senator Orrin Hatch, who had some information. He said, remember the Millennium threat, which of course you remember, Peter, we all do, and he said it was a very real threat, but if they had the intelligence to be able to block terrorist attacks. He said a month ago there was a general report that a big attack was being planned, and that they pulled a ship out of the Persian Gulf. And he said they now have some data that says that people on the aircraft, these are his words, appeared to be associated with bin Laden, and furthermore he has information that people generally associated with bin Laden, because he says it's more than one organization, acknowledge with joy that a couple of the other targets were hit. He said, Peter, that the next 12 to 24 hours are absolutely crucial, because if you don't find out who did this, within 24 hours they all go underground. And he considers this an act of war.
Well, just before you go on, because I know you have some other news as well, if Senator Hatch is anywhere near a television set and can hear us, we'd like him to come on and explain this in some detail, because I think there's some skepticism around this. These remarks by Senator Hatch have been around by some time, and now they've been repeated by him to you, that there's somehow an Osama bin Laden collection very quickly. And I know people are desperate to find out what, but we certainly would like the Senator to come on and explain in detail what he means, and the connection to this ship that was being pulled out of the Persian Gulf some time ago. Do you know precisely what he's referring to?
He said, you may remember that the ship was pulled out because we thought that, I guess, that their feeling was, I shouldn't guess, that there may have been some attack on that ship.
Yeah,
so they pulled that ship out.
Tremendous sensitivity in the Persian Gulf ever since the attack on the USS Cole in which 17, do I recall correctly, John, 17 Americans.
Senator Hatch also says that part of the problem and part of the reason that we haven't known as much as we should have is that the CIA has been cut so much and their budget has been cut so much, and we have not had the human intelligence to be able to infiltrate the various organizations that we used to have prior to the 70s.
Let me just ask you one more question. But
Yeah.
Senator Hatch appears to be talking about communication between people who either know or associated with Osama bin Laden in the wake of this incident.
Yes.
And we all know what happened in this incident. So is he talking about people talking about the operation in ways that you and I and millions of Americans
Well, I
would
guess
not?
what he's saying is we have, before they were saying, well, we think it's bin Laden, we're not sure, and he is saying, I have some data, I have some information that says people associated with him acknowledge that it's happened. So more and more the finger points more definitely at bin Laden. But I also talked to Senator John Edwards,
Right.
who's a Democrat from North Carolina and is on the Intelligence Committee and is one of the, as you know, young, fresh faces that some people say might be a presidential candidate. And he didn't seem as definite. He had just talked to the head of the CIA, and we have that if you want to see
Okay,
that.
yeah, here's the tape. By all means, we'd like to hear your part of your interview.
Senator Edwards, I understand that earlier today you spoke to the head of the CIA, George Tenet. Can you tell us anything about that discussion?
The thing that's clear to me is that they're making real progress, that we're going to identify who's responsible for this, and that we're, in fact, as a nation, going to hold them responsible.
We keep hearing that it's Osama bin Laden. How do we know that?
I can't answer that question. I'm sorry.
Maybe this sounds like a very dumb question, but are we sure that this was done by foreigners?
Well, I think at this moment, the public is certainly not sure. I think the director of our intelligence gathering activities feel like they've made real progress and have a pretty good idea of what's happening and who's responsible.
Could I just have a yes or no? Are we sure it's not foreigners?
I can't answer that question. I'm sorry.
Senator Edwards, you've had concern now for quite a while about terrorist attacks and had wanted more security. What should have been done?
Well, actually, Barbara, there are some of us who've been working on some legislation, a law, that's directed at doing specifically that. Senator Graham, Bob Graham, Dianne Feinstein, and I, along with others, have drafted legislation before this incident occurred that does three things. One, puts more resources, more money into fighting terrorism, counterterrorism. Two, coordinates all of the federal agencies, and I think there are 41 of them that are involved, who are involved in counterterrorism, and creates a terrorism czar to oversee that effort. And third, gives the director of the CIA more legal authority to do what needs to be done to fight terrorism. I might add, Barbara, I think that the people who've committed these acts on the United States, who killed all those innocent men and women and children today, underestimate the American people. And I think what they're about to find out is the American people are strong, they are courageous, and they are resolute. And our response will be powerful.
Is this war?
Oh, I think whenever we see the kind of attack we saw in the United States today, certainly if it were state-sponsored, it would be war, and I think we should treat it as an act of war.
How do we combat this kind of terrorism?
We need more money spent on combating terrorism, which is such a serious threat to the American people. We need to coordinate to make sure that all of our agencies are working together in a coordinated fashion to fight these folks. And number three, we need to make sure that the legal authority is in place so that the director of the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, can do what's necessary to fight these people.
Well, I must say he says some things which confuse me, and maybe in subsequent conversation with you got him. He said, if this is state-sponsored terrorism, it is war. And then he said it's war. So is he telling us something he knows about who sponsored this terrorist act?
What I thought was interesting, too, is when I said, are you sure that this is a foreign act? You know, could it be domestic? And he said, I can't answer that question. And that's why I said, well, you know, a simple yes or no. I mean, are we sure that this is a foreign organization? So I found that, and I kept pressing it and couldn't get further. I found that, you know, confusing myself.
Well, really
if it's state-sponsored, it is, but if it's an individual, it isn't.
Well, that's a technical issue, of course, as we've said earlier, because if it is state-sponsored terrorism, the United States is obliged under a declaration of war to do certain things. But John, let me just talk to John Miller here for a second, because John spends so much time on this. First of all, you have a senator say to us now, we're making real progress. but I can't say what it is. Now, I would argue at a moment like this that if we're making real progress, someone has an obligation to come and tell the American people they're making real progress and help them understand something.
And that may be true, and that someone might be the president. I think the box that the senator finds himself in, and of course you can't tell from his coded answer, is when he says, I can't answer that question, is it because I don't know, or is it because he's the recipient of a classified briefing that he could answer that question if he were allowed to? I think
my feeling was that he was the recipient of some information and just didn't feel that he should give it out now.
And if you were pressing him on that issue, would have caused him to breach that classified briefing by giving the specific answer or how he knew, he'd actually be in violation of law and his clearance. That may be the stumbling block he found in those two very sensitive and direct questions.
The dilemma is that politicians want to be on television commenting on a situation, but they don't want to go as far as I think probably the public, not just us, would like them to go at the moment. He does say three other things, which I think are quite important at the moment, is that he is one of those people who's argued for more resources for the counterintelligence effort in the war against terrorism, and there are lots of politicians of both parties like him. John, he's interested in having greater coordination between federal agencies. There's almost invariably a lack of coordination on issues like this between the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, other elements even of the Justice Department. How bad is it, or is it okay?
It's bad. It's always been worse. The CIA used to be focused on foreign issues, the FBI largely on domestic. Since the FBI has become the lead agency in acts of international terrorism not on U.S. soil, they've had to compare a lot more notes with the CIA. You find that the FBI and the CIA now have a working desk, a terrorism desk together at CIA headquarters staffed by FBI people. CIA people are assigned to the FBI's Joint Terrorist Task Force. So you see them pulling closer together, but anytime you have the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, the FBI, the National Security Agency, you're going to have agencies that are competitive about who gets information, who distributes information to whom, and really who gets credit for information. And breaking down the bureaucratic walls between those divides and letting that information flow freely has always been a difficulty. Sharing.
Can I just ask you one question? What do you think of the idea of a terrorist czar? That is, somebody now who's going to be overall in charge of all of this, which was his other suggestion.
Well, I mean, in a case like we were just talking about, the sharing of information, the coordination of effort, that person would be, for lack of a better term, the grown-up that would divide up these agencies and say, no, this is what your role is going to be, this is what you're going to do, and stop competing or dividing efforts or duplicating.
Not my job.
Thank you, Peter.
Not my job. Thank you, Barbara, very much for talking to them. And as I say, if you're talking to Senator Hatch, tell him we'd like to talk to him, because there are several other questions we would like to ask him, given what he told you and also what he's got out there floating around on the wire services as well. I want to, just before we go to our next report, and as we look at Lower Manhattan, I just want to remind you of some basic things. There is, in the distance late this evening, is the skeleton of the front entrance, of one of the World Trade Towers on the west side of New York, and that is what's left. And we had that young man go down today, and 110 stories up. You see that photograph on the right? 110 stories up on the right would have been the top of the trade tower, the single trade tower, and that, go back to the nighttime shot if we would, that is what is left this evening of the twin trade towers on the west side of Lower New York City. 50,000 people worked in there. One of the hardest things to grasp all day is it happened just before 9 o'clock. How many people were at work? How many people managed to get out? How many people survived? First, the attack on the building. At 9:03 a.m. when the first attack occurred, and the second, sorry, at 9:03, just before 9 o'clock, the first attack, then the second one at 9:03, and then when these buildings collapsed at 10:28 approximately in the morning. And that is the #1 question, I think, for everybody in the country, even paramount at the moment, to trying to find out who the perpetrators of this terrorism were. But it is part of our job to throw the net around the rest of the world and talk to our assets about why we might suspect one individual or another. And criticize, if we will, the fact that bin Laden's name, Osama bin Laden, Saudi citizen, Saudi millionaire, who has helped to finance a lot of operations in the world in the view of the United States. It's inevitable at a moment like this that his name comes up to the top. ABC's John Cooley, who's covered the Middle East and intelligence matters in the Middle East at every single level for us for almost 30 years, points out a short while ago in a message to us that maybe bin Laden is one of the obvious perpetrators here, but it's Cooley's judgment at this point, but acting on his own. John Miller, just confirm for me, Osama bin Laden is a loner. He does not act in concert with government, or we've not seen any evidence of that, I believe, even though the Taliban in Afghanistan have given him some measure of protection. Fair comment?
Fair comment. The only indication we've seen of that is that bin Laden's people, according to U.S. intelligence, have cross-trained with Hezbollah, which, of course, had a very tight relationship with the Iranian government, but not with Iraq, not with Libya.
Okay. Let's hold this thought, because, in fact, Senator Hatch has called us from Washington. Senator Hatch, do you hear me?
Yeah, you called me.
Well, I'm very glad to say that we did.
Okay.
And whoever called who, you're being quoted pretty widely at the moment as inferring, and you're a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, you're the senior Republican on the Judiciary Committee, rather. You're being interpreted fairly widely as believing, in the wake of this attack today, that you know some connection between it and Osama bin Laden. True or not?
Well, let me put it this way. I'm, as a ranking member on the Judiciary Committee and as a twice member on the Intelligence Committee,
right. I
chatted with the top law enforcement people, the top people at the CIA, and they made it very clear that to me that just about everything points in the direction of Osama bin Laden. There's no question that they intercepted information that included people associated with Osama bin Laden who acknowledged that a couple of targets were hit.
Everybody in the world knew a couple of targets were hit, Senator.
Well,
did you press the question?
This is look, Peter. Don't give me that. These are people at the top of the CIA. And I'm just saying that that's what they said. And keep in mind, bin Laden said it was every Muslim's duty to kill Americans. We know that people associated with bin Laden are taking pleasure in this attack. We know there's some data on people on the aircraft who appear to be associated with bin Laden. They're still studying this, so they're not positive, but they appear to be associated with bin Laden. And, you know, these are... We also are pretty darn sure that bin Laden was behind the attack on the USS Cole. So these are things that are very, very serious. Almost everything points to them, and it's a serious situation.
Yeah, I don't mean, Senator, to underestimate the potential of Mr. bin Laden. We're just trying to get at what you know today.
Well, that's what I know today. Now,
well, Senator, forgive me.
Sure.
The Associated Press also says, quote, attributes to you the information that law enforcement has data possibly linking one person on one of the 4 ill-fated flights to be members of bin Laden's organization. Is that true, sir?
It was told to me that there is some data on people on the aircraft who appear to be associated with bin Laden. I don't know which aircraft. I didn't ask that question.
Okay. I appreciate...
But they did say that they're still studying this, and they're going to try and verify that and bring that down to reality. But these are all just matters that appear to be, you know, to be pointing in the direction of Osama bin Laden.
Okay. I appreciate very much, Senator, getting you on the telephone this evening and you clarifying for that. Just to reconfirm before we lose you.
Sure.
You, as you told Barbara Walters and the Associated Press, you've been talking to U.S. intelligence, and they've told you they intercepted communications between bin Laden supporters discussing the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon.
But to give you the exact language, it was that they got information that included people associated with Osama bin Laden, where they acknowledged that a couple of targets were hit. They didn't name the targets, but you have to presume. And this is top intelligence information that they told me I could comment about.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator Hatch. Appreciate you taking the time.
You bet.
Glad we were able to find you.
Okay.
So the senator does confirm that what he said to the Associated Press and Barbara Walters is what he actually heard from senior officials in the CIA, which takes us back, of course, to Mr. bin Laden. And there has been no one in the history of international terrorism who's been more elusive, who has stymied the United States to any greater degree. And we were talking just a minute ago about ABC's John Cooley, who's covered intelligence on the ground throughout the Middle East, and he makes a couple of observations which are quite fascinating. They're all speculation. They're all speculation. We're all involved in speculation today about bin Laden. But John Cooley says the Taliban could in some way assist bin Laden, giving him access, this is very interesting, John, to former Afghan Air Force pilots who were trained during the Soviet era, when the United States was, of course, using Afghanistan as a bulwark against the Soviet Union to some extent. He points out that Jane's Defense Weekly, one of the most authoritative defense journals in the world, recently did a recent review of bin Laden's military capability globally, which they did conclude was impressive, well-organized, and very wealthy. And I think everybody knows that. Am I right, John?
That's true, and I have to point out a couple of interesting facts about bin Laden, underlining that I continue to join in speculation. Number one, we learned in the embassy bombing trial that bin Laden had hired pilots and obtained surplus military aircraft to transport his people around. So there is a history of having trained people, professional aircraft pilots, to fly big planes, in this case, the smaller versions of the C-130. We also know from the same case that bin Laden had recruited former Egyptian military people who actually, one of them, Sergeant Ali Mohammed, became a U.S. military advisor with U.S. Special Forces. So the idea that it would be far-fetched for him to have imported the type of expertise who could give people, and forgive the irony of this statement, a crash course in how to operate a large jet, is not as far-fetched as you might think.
Exactly. It's interesting that John Cooley should remind us, and I should remind people at home, that you're one of the only journalists in the world who's actually gone to see Osama bin Laden and interview him. Oh, we're talking 3 years ago now?
This would have been in May of 1998, and the statements he made that day really portended the future. He said,